Today we're discussing collecting baseball cards for profit, the decline of the baseball card market, 1993 to 2009. So there's many books that one can obtain for buying, collecting, selling, and investing in baseball cards. And they will tell you how to do it. But since the baseball card market is so transient that many of these cards are out of date soon after they are printed. There are also many books that basically you can go through on any particular era or decade and see what cards were manufactured by different companies, particularly the Topps baseball card company. And then there is book after book after book. Most of them are outdated, but have many relevant items that are contained within. They tell you certainly about vintage cards or cards of that particular decade. There's more than everything you ever wanted to know about baseball cards in terms of the very old legendary cards, as well as the cards of the post-World War II, as well as the cards in the junk wax era. And there are books and more books and more books that one can see and read about collecting cards, some of them very interesting and tell kind of personal stories and whatnot. And then we look at books that were actually typical of the particular era that was the junk wax era, and complete books on all those cards that were available during that particular time from about 1989 to 1993. There was the 1989 baseball cards, the 1990 baseball cards, the 1991, 92, 93, and it kind of stops. So right in the midst of this basically overproduction of cards, there were books of the cards for each of those years. And then they kind of disappear off the map. And there are books that kind of compose all the cards of the particular era. One that was written back in 1976, and another book that was written in 2012. And the latest book that really kind of gives you a really front row seat in terms of what was taking place during this junk wax era is the very popular Mint Condition by James Jamison, which we'll be discussing later. So one of the things that happened during this particular time that we're talking about and the problem with the card collecting during this time was the rising cost of packs of baseball cards. Naturally, there's going to be some kind of inflation that's happening. So we go back to the 1950s, and packs surprisingly cost as little as 1 cent to 5 cents per pack. Then they continue to go up. In 1960, it goes up almost doubled to 10 cents a pack. When we reach the 70s, it's about 15 cents to 20 cents a pack. In the 80s, it ranges from 35 cents to 40 cents a pack. Come the 90s, it goes up to 50 or 55 cents per pack for the classic Topps card. However, in 1989, Upper Deck introduced its kind of elite packages that were foils and so forth, and it doubled in price, and the suggested retail price was $1 a pack. And then a few years later, that Topps Stadium Clubs came out with a premium type of card that charged $1.25. And now today, there continues to be a rise, and it turns out that today's most packs can cost anywhere from $5 to $10. So a great increase over the decades in terms of the cost of cards. And during this particular period, there was an exodus of young hobbyists and the emergence of middle-aged dad gamblers. What we're referring to is pure hobbyists were mostly youngsters who eventually were priced out of the market, not only in terms of what the initial cards cost, but also if they were going to purchase cards, them of their favorite players, that were constantly being marked up and kind of really out of many of their price ranges. The business became less about the kids and more about the adults who had a kind of gambling mentality. These middle-aged dads were hoarding unopened boxes, snapping up hundreds of cards of the latest rookies, and collating card sets of all the years. And the reason for it was they thought that in 20 years, they would be worth a fortune. And the joke was that these middle-aged men with children were actually saving and going to pay for their kids' college education through the profits they made off of these particular cards, sets, and boxes. So 1976, and some will say 1973, it really doesn't get bad until the 80s and 90s, but 1976, really when mass production begins. And so there was this kind of question of this scarcity of the cards you were collecting. Was it perceived or was it actual? The thrill of investing has everything to do with scarcity. So that if you're going to get a card that would have value to it, then one thing that's critical is that it's kind of unique, or very few are available. So that would make the value go up. But scarcity can be engineered, as was done so by the card manufacturers of the time. Card collectors themselves were clueless to the fact that most major cards and sets were in the multi-millions. In other words, there were so many cards produced, way beyond one's even possible expectations. And card companies did not publicize their production runs. So this was evolving into a very extreme baseball card glut, generated by greed on the part of most of the card manufacturers and perhaps a few hobby shops. And proliferation of card shows, card companies, hobby shops, and brands were occurring. In fact, there are over 10,000 card shops during the late 80s and early 90s, which is more than the number of Starbucks today. In the 1990s, there were 6 companies producing cards, and these companies were producing as many as 80 different brands of cards. So there was an enormous amount of cards, enormous amount of brands of cards and variations for people to collect during that time. So the market declines. Vintage cards, however, those that are before 1980, seem immune from the market decline. They either held their own or kind of gradually kind of inched their way up. But the 80s and 90 cards that were collected were valuable only if they were pristine, gem mint with a grading of a 10, if they were Hall of Famers, or if they were successful rookies. And in 2022, the only 2 card companies that remain were Fanatics and Panini, despite those that preceded, and there were so many card companies. So in 1988, eBay opened the eyes of collectors to the massive supply and limitless available baseball cards. Prior to that, there was some kind of suggestion that there were too many cards, but really it was the eBay that kind of really made this evident to the collector. In 1995, eBay was founded, and in 2020, now there are over 45 million trading cards being sold, and that is about 119 cards are listed every minute on eBay. It's the biggest marketplace for card collectors, so it's a good kind of reference in terms of just how many cards are out there and how many are being sold. And it exposed individuals to the increasing chance of quick results, both selling and locating cards. So it's very valuable if you wanted to get a large audience to see which card you were selling, or if you were trying to basically get a card for an addition to your collection or particular wants. And you see over in the photos that at this particular time, how much that cards of the players, even before the steroid era, kind of were going down because there were so many cards. And you can see that of these rookie cards, like Roger Clemens, I mean, people were selling many lots. So people could get lots of those cards, which of course made a person realize, wow, these cards are not so scarce, not so rare. And there were even books, and there are books available today on how to sell your cards on eBay. And it's good for selling low to mid-level cards. It is, you have to pay a fee, and usually that fee is between 5 and 15%. eBay, though, sides with the buyer in their description. In other words, it is a buyer's market. Buyers are basically going to have the advantage on eBay because there's so many kind of alternatives to choose from that they can get an incredible range of cards in incredible different grades. And eBay pushed the PSA 10s at the expense of raw cards and lower grades. As you can see here, you have a Ken Griffey card, which may be a high grade, but it's raw. But if you basically get it graded, it goes up quite considerably, almost as much as 3 to 4 times in this advertisement. So hobby to investment opportunities. Kids collecting cards are their baseball heroes. It turns to grown men hoarding pictures and other men for financial gain. So basically, they're looking to kind of make a profit off these cards, which the idea was really kind of put into their heads due to these price guides. In 1979, the first baseball price guides were made available, and they changed the way that people looked at cards. In other words, you would look at a price guide 1 month and then get one the next month and see that the very rookie card had gone up quite a bit from 1 month to the next. And if it keeps going like that, wow, what a great investment if I buy it at this lower price and eventually it'll be worth lots of money like the vintage cards were. And the many believed, as previously suggested, that these cards could be an investment opportunity and could even pay for their children's education. And it added a legitimacy to the ridiculous prices. In other words, you could see what the kind of standard value of these particular cards were, and they were kind of given a card grading that was very kind of broad at that particular time. And it was less of a hobby now and more of a way to make a quick buck. And it was kind of all generated by, as Dr. Jim Beckett. And it really was, in a sense, that these price guides drove up the prices. And I don't think, or no one really blames Dr. Beckett for this, but it just kind of was a perfect storm in terms of these cards. I can check them almost every month. They keep going up on a regular basis with no regard to the glut or the overproduction of those cards. And so collecting was so popular during this particular time of the late 80s and early 90s that not only were the cards being collected, but even the price guides were being collected. And in a survey of just basically individuals in terms of Beckett's, they even rate their favorite Beckett. And many of these during that era were selling quite high in terms of the celebrity baseball players that were on the cover. So the refill frenzy and investment mindset was really taking hold during this glut or this junk wax era. And as I said, the price guides fueled the frenzy by providing the current values. And basically, you could see that the cards that you had, the sets that you made and so forth, were going up in price pretty steadily over the years during this particular junk wax era. The focus was on the next big rookie to collect, such as the Ken Griffey card. And people were purchasing this really kind of unaware that there were over 1 million copies made. So though it was kind of falsely inflated in terms of the prices that were going for $40 to $60 to $80 to $100, even as a raw card, there were so many that they couldn't possibly be worth that much. And so that the baseball card collecting hobby became a poor man's stock market, turning this cardboard into cash. You could buy a $1 card today and quadruple your money tomorrow. And the price guides and the newer cards and the hype all kind of generated this frenzy of buying baseball cards. But then in 1994, this kind of really came to a halt. And one of the things that was kind of responsible for bringing it to this halt, or certainly beginning of the decline, was the baseball strike. In 1994, Major League Baseball was canceled due to the strike, and there was no baseball during that season for 235 days. And for the first time, that this World Series was canceled in a long time, and casual card collectors were no longer interested in a free fall in the card prices. So what is happening is, as this glut of cards is coming out, and there's a frenzy in terms of that the prices are rallying and going up and up and up, and the manufacturers are making more and more cards to meet the demand, eventually the supply exceeds the demand and the cards are not worth anymore and they begin to go down. And this is only really made aware to the public sort of when eBay starts giving examples of how many cards are really out there in terms of available to those card collectors. So the bubble begins to burst. And speculators were hoarding cards in hopes that they would have high profits. So all these cards were being bought up, but they weren't really being bought up by collectors. They were being bought up by people who would buy many in order to sell them at a later date for a much greater profit. And In 1977, as we said, the mass production begins, or the overproduction of these cars begins. In 1980s, new companies entered the market and flooded with different brands and updates, as well as ramping up production. So we see that in 1980, Topps was the only card maker, and then over the next 10 years, you're going to have Fleer, you're going to have Score, you're going to have Donruss, Upper Deck, Bowman will reintroduce cards. So everything kind of takes off in terms of the number of cards, as well as the number of card manufacturers. And press runs were increased to meet the demands of this burgeoning market. In other words, they weren't interested in terms of creating a valuable asset to the buyers. They were interested in selling as many cards as they could, and that's just plain business. The laws of supply and demand meant that the prices would soon drop way down. So what happened was, from 1984 to 1930, it's referred to, as I said, the junk wax era. And some people think it started as early as 1973. You'll hear some write-ups in terms of as early as 1976, and some later on, maybe starting in 1971. And pretty much those time periods between 1987 and 1993 where the really overproduction and overpurchase became evident. By 1993, the supply exceeded the demand, and trading cards do not have any absolute monetary value. It's not like gold. It's not like famous artist paintings. They really in themselves do not have a whole lot of value, and they're only worth as much as the collector was willing to pay. So that having so many and so available, that you would not find many individuals who are going to pay high prices when they can get them on eBay for a lower price. And baseball cards from the 80s and 90s were actually deemed worthless, except for those exceptions in terms of the highly graded PS10s, some of the Hall of Famers, and some of the successful rookies. And so that all of these changes, as you see, kind of go from 1984 to 1997, and you see a drop. The rise and fall of the baseball card industry. In the 1990s, manufacturers produced an estimated 81 billion cards per year. And according to the book, as we said, I mentioned, by Dave Jamieson on mint condition, and 325 cards for every man, woman, and child was produced. They rolled out so much product, it diluted any value to the cards. And so in the card market, it peaked maybe later and started out in the 80s as $15 million in sales. 1991, it got up to 1.2 billion sales. In 92, it continued to surge to 1.5 billion. But in 2000, it was now down to 400 million in sales, and even further down in 2008 to 200 million in sales. So 2009 really marks the kind of low point, or for the decline in the baseball card industry, and certainly for the manufacturers. So what we see is the economy struggled due to the 2008 recession. So you had people have less spendable dollars because of the stock market really went way down, and it didn't kind of take hold again for many years after that. You have the demand for trading cards significantly decreased because there was an exodus from the market, as I say, kids collecting cards, as well as the baseball strike and so forth. And many perceived collecting and swapping baseball cards as child's play, which also led to exodus of the hobby. And in 2009, revenue had progressively slowed down due to the overproduction of cards, especially in the 80s and 90s. Income dropped 80% down from 1990 to less than 200 million in 2009, and 6 prominent card makers had folded by 2009, leaving only 2 manufacturers, Topps and Panini, around. So if you are interested in learning additional information about baseball card industry, the history of baseball cards, profiting and investing in baseball cards, or ideas to bring the fun back to collecting, be sure to follow us below. Feel free to view our library of YouTube videos, and please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Also, check out our eBay store, where we have available for sale many of the cards shown in these videos. So that's it for now. Take the rest of the day off, and we will talk later.